When life and the world seem to spin out of control, where can one go for a little tough love and common sense? For many of us, that's usually the time we call mom. My next guest is a Catholic syndicated talk show host whose own mother serves as an inspiration for her latest book, Everything's Coming Up Rosie, 10 Things My Feisty Italian Mom Taught Me About Living a Godly Life. I can relate. Please welcome back to the program, Teresa Tomeo. Teresa, thanks for being here. Now, you write that your mother's voice is always in your head. Is that a good thing? And why did you feel you had to write a book in your mother's
Yeah, I
Jersey
guess that's a
accent, no
great
less?
question. I think when I was growing up, I would say maybe not so much, but I think now, yes, it's a very good thing because I realize the older I get, she spoke so much truth. And sure, it was feisty, as I say in the subtitle of the book, a lot of fun, but just basic common sense, Raymond, that we just don't see anymore. And she reminds me a lot, as I say in the book, of Mother Angelica, a little bit of Marie Barone from Everybody Loves Raymond, and Sophia Petrillo from Golden Girls, kind of all rolled up into one, if you can imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine, believe me. You write that common sense is not really that common anymore, and neither is common decency, but that people desire to really get back to those basics. Why do you think there's a common lack of common sense and decency in society today? And what are the basics you think people are looking to return to?
Well, I think it's to me, it's pretty obvious. I think from my own story, because I fell away from the faith, as you know, for many, many years. And once you do that,
Mhm.
things slowly, even if you don't want to admit it, start to spin out of control. And I think we've just gotten so far away from God, from the basic understanding of who we are as human beings. We saw that loneliness report that came out from the Surgeon General a few weeks ago, where he's saying we have an epidemic of loneliness. And I could just hear my mother's voice. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article about this for the Register that was posted last week. I could hear my mother's voice in my head saying, "For crying out loud, are you kidding me? You got to have the Surgeon General tell you to pick up the phone and call your mother." I mean, literally, he was telling us to answer the phone when a friend calls, invite someone over for dinner, do something to support others in the community. So we are so far away from really caring about other people and so closed in on ourselves that I think there is this desire, but people are fighting it for some reason. I think it's fear. Maybe they fear that if they go back to God or engage in a relationship with God or with other people, that they'll lose something. But you could just tell in terms of what we're seeing out there in society, a rise in depression. Numbers came out this week on that, highest in a long time. The loneliness report, the CDC's report on young girls. We need to get back to the basics of caring about one another, the golden rule, and just common sense, quite frankly.
In your chapter entitled "It's Not All Peaches and Cream," which focuses on really turning to God when we face challenges and suffering, you quote Pope Benedict XVI and his encyclical Spe Salvi, where he writes, quote, "It is not by sidestepping or fleeing from suffering that we are healed, but rather by our capacity for accepting it, maturing through it, and finding meaning through union with Christ, who suffered with infinite love." How did your mom's teaching about dealing with suffering and pain mimic Benedict and that encyclical? And why is it so important that we face our suffering and challenges in life?
Yeah, that's really a great question. And my mother certainly didn't have a college education. She had a high school education. She didn't have a theology degree, but she went through a lot of suffering in her own life, discriminated against Italian American family, very poor family on the East Coast, and also losing a child. My sister died of cancer, losing her husband. So she
Mm,
did go through a lot. And then we had a very traumatic experience when I lived in Jersey City, New Jersey, where I was born,
mm,
where our apartment exploded and two people actually died in that
yeah.
explosion. And we were homeless for a while, living, from relative to relative, then having to move to Michigan. But my mom always persevered. I think it's because she came from a big, very strong Italian Catholic family. And you just
Mm.
pulled up your bootstraps and you just kept going. And I think that's the lesson I learned, that no matter what, God is still in charge. And the last chapter in the book is keep smiling. And my mother never lost her joy
Mm.
through all that suffering. And the other thing that she taught me too is that you can learn from suffering. And that's why the first chapter in the book is offer it up to God and put it at the foot of the cross, because we have to start there. We have to go to God, offer it up to Him, surrender our lives every day. And then also look back in terms of gratitude. Okay, yeah, I've gone through a rough patch, or we've gone through this, or we've lost someone we love, but put things in the big picture. and understand that this is not our home, that we're on a journey, we're on a pilgrimage. But again, I think my parents, my mom especially, just kept pushing through. She had that, that real solid grit, that determination, that zeal that Mother Angelica talked about all the time.
Yeah, well, your mother, Rosie, also taught you the importance of redemptive suffering and letting go. And you discuss it in a chapter I love. Offer it up to God and put it at the foot of the cross. You point out that in the social media world we live in today, letting go and not making a nasty comment in response can be more difficult than it seems, much less offering suffering up to God. How did Rosie's version of Catholic teaching on redemptive suffering and letting go help in your life? And what can others glean from what you learned?
Well, it started when I was a child, where if my sisters and I, if we weren't feeling well, she'd say, offer it up, offer it up. And I'm thinking, why would God want my stomach ache or my headache or, the fight I had with my best friend at school? What she was trying to tell me is to give it over to God, because you can't solve things on your own. You have to have God's help. And she also said, just take a breath, give it over to God, and then come back to it and again, push through and learn from it. And as I look back over my life, despite some of the suffering that I've gone through and being away from the church and some of the pains, those are the times I know that I've learned the most. And I had a Bible study teacher say to me once, all sunshine makes a desert. And I think about that in relationship to what my mother said, and also Mother Angelica, one of my favorite quotes, and I have this in the book, where she said, the cross is not negotiable, sweetheart. It's a requirement, and that holiness is not for wimps. And so I think this idea of, okay, you're suffering, you give it over to God, and asking God to help you understand it, not to say why, but what am I supposed to learn from this? And that's the other big lesson that came out of all of it, is that I have looked back on my life and said, okay, I went through this, and this is what I've learned, whether it's been on the professional level or on the personal level. I often tell people when I give my testimony that sometimes we look at our life like the back of a tapestry or a piece of needlepoint that can be very messy with strings and yarn going all over the place. And yet if we turn it around, we see how it makes sense maybe years later. And it's a beautiful portrait, a beautiful picture of what God has done in our life. So I don't see how you can not offer it up to God, because everything we go through, God will use it. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose.
Yeah, no, there's a wonderful, what I call practical, lived spirituality that this book is filled with. And really, that is the hallmark of all the Italian mamas in my life. My own mother, Linda, my grandmother, Mary, and of course, Reverend Mother Angelica. All of those women had that kind of practical lived faith, and your book is filled with that. What you mentioned a little while ago, the Surgeon General's report on loneliness and its effect on people. What do you think Rosie would advise regarding those who have cocooned themselves away and cloistered themselves from society at large at this point?
Oh, she would basically say, get over yourself and get out there, pick up the phone, go visit your mother, go visit your cousin, go visit your sister, make somebody a bowl of macaroni. Simple things for being there. And I can remember something that my husband and I heard when we were in the diaconate program. The very first class that we went through, one of our diaconate teachers said, very similar to what my mother said. He said, you know what? Christianity is just about starting with showing up. And that's what my mother would say, show up, be there for someone. Yeah, it's so obvious. And yet we need to go over those lessons and be told by the highest medical official in the land to pick up the phone, return a phone call, invite someone over for dinner. So my mom would just say, get over yourself and get out there and do something with someone else.
Well, but the problem is you have more persuasive forces in the pop culture telling young people particularly, your phone is your God, this is all you need, stay connected, stay popular, stay in the know by staying on this in your cocoon. And for many, they have created a new alternative reality. That report, that Surgeon General's report, also notes troublingly that the importance of religion in fostering social communications. It says religious and faith-based groups can be a source of regular social contact, serve as a community of support, provide meaning and purpose, create a sense of belonging around shared values and beliefs, and are associated with reduced risk-taking behaviors. But unfortunately, Teresa, participation among U.S. adults is down religiously over the last 50 years. And I could go into the numbers, but they're too depressing. I'm going to leave it aside. But how do you re-engage them? I mean, that's the point. When you've seen a 70% drop from 1999, what can we as Catholics do to change this?
That's really important. And I think why the book is helpful with this is because, as you said, Raymond, it's very practical. So what I try to do is I try to invite people to events. If we're having a speaker at my parish, or if we're having a potluck dinner, or if we're having a prayer group or a Bible study, I think it has to be one-on-one. I think you really have to meet people where they're at and then bring them along, as that diaconate instructor told us, to show up, to be there when people need you. For example, if there's a crisis in their life, or maybe not go over and have a cup of coffee with them. I really think it's one-on-one, to show them and to witness to them about the faith. Personal relationship and personal encounter, I think, is super important. We really have to engage them again, but so many people have been away for so long that hitting them over the head with the catechism or the Bible, or saying, oh my gosh, you've got to get back into church, that may not reach them as much as being kind to them, being helpful, having a conversation. And my mom was so good at that. Even today, my mom's been gone now for 3 years. She died in 2020, right before COVID. Wherever I go, whether it's to the dentist office or whether it's to the flower shop down the street from our house, and I live very close to my mom, they would say, oh, I miss your mom. She was so kind. She was so friendly. Even in church, every week she would sit in the same spot with her best friend, Jeannie, after their husbands died. They always went to the donut social, but she was always inviting people to meet with her, to sit with them. She was a social butterfly. She was a very, very outgoing person. And I think that's what we need to be. We need to be engaging, and we need to invite people and show them that we care as a result of our faith. This is who we are as Christians. And my mother did that very well.
And this is, yeah, I love that in the book. And again, I'll strike this chord again because it's true. It's practical. It's practical and it's effective. You know, so many Catholics, I think, and people of all faiths, they kind of collapse into what I call a theoretical, a theoretical ideal. And it's easier for them to either quote the Bible or quote the catechism, but it's brittle. That doesn't reach people where they are today. They need you to be that living Bible, that living expression of faith. And too often, let's face it, Teresa, it's a bad ride. These people are deadly boring. You know, they're in their own cocoons. They need to come out and be among us and kind of get in the game and reach people where they are. That's what Jesus did. That's what the apostles did. That's certainly what Mother Angelica and your mother did. Your mother had a very firm response. I love this in the book. When you complained about being bored, what did she tell you? You're right about this in the book. I don't want to ruin the story.
She said, go ride your bike. And then she would tell me, she'd go into the story about how growing up in Jersey City, New Jersey, with 9 brothers and sisters, they didn't have bikes. If they had a bike, they shared it among the whole neighborhood. They would play on the stoop or the front porch, right? Or they would play, you know, in the water when the fire department would come and open up the fire hydrant. So they have, you know, their own version of, let's say, a pool, that's all they had growing up in the inner city, you know, in a poor neighborhood. And she would make me think about, okay, we weren't rich. We grew up in a middle class home, but we had nice things. I had nice toys. Every few years I'd get a new bike. And she'd say, you got a bike sitting out there in the garage. I didn't have that when I was a kid. You're not going to be bored. Go ride your bike. And, you know, at first I would roll my eyes, but then I started thinking about that. And even as I got older, it's like, wow, pretty good common sense. Think about what you have. And another chapter in the book, I'm sure you saw this, is really funny. I was complaining about not having a pool. And she said she was so frustrated. You want a pool? Go fill up a garbage can. In other words, you can't always have what you want and make do with what you have. But that's great advice because so many parents today, and God love them, they try to do the right thing. They give their kids too much. Dr. Ray Grundy talks about this all the time. And so they have everything, and then they keep wanting more and more, and nothing satisfies. They have to learn that you can't always have everything you want, that, you know what, life is going to not always be peaches and cream. So again, I tried to write it from a practical perspective, and to encourage parents not to be afraid to say no, and to learn how to do that, because it's really about loving someone when you're saying no in certain circumstances.
Well, it also teaches kids to not only respect and appreciate what they have, but to see the glory and wonder in new things that are, you know, authentically come to you or that you encounter in life. Look, I was on my way into a New York building today, and I stopped for the first time, and I've been in this building, I don't know, 30 times. And I noticed the beautiful work on the walls and the ceilings of this place, beautiful hand-painted gold frescoes on the ceiling. I just never paid attention to it before. And I kind of sat there for a moment and took it in and said, imagine the workman and the craftsmanship that went into this. Those
Right.
moments we lose when we're rushing from one thing to another. There's another chapter in the book. It's called Remember Your Blessed Mother is Watching You, which is what your mother used to say to you before you'd go out with friends to remind you not to do anything you'd regret. How did that dose of Italian guilt shape Teresa Tomeo?
I think that sometimes, and I'm not talking about the guilt in the book, I explain this. I'm not talking about the guilt that sometimes it really puts people in a situation where they can't move forward, they can't accept forgiveness. That's not the type of guilt we're talking about. We're talking about those little, those little dabs, those little nudges from the Holy Spirit or our moms that remind us that we should have remorse. We should feel badly if we hurt someone. We should feel, wrong. We should feel that we've done something wrong if we're ignoring someone. So when my mom would say to me, remember, the Blessed Mother is watching you, that would be planted in my mind. Now try to do something, unethical as a kid or as a teenager or as a college student with the image of our beautiful lady in the back of your head. That's why my mother was, even though she was not a theologian, basically with a master's degree, she was a pretty smart street theologian. But also, I think helping us respect each other and then growing up with the images in the house of the Blessed Mother, of the Last Supper, the crucifix on the wall, having those images. And Mother Angelica talked about holy images right in the home. That made an impression on me, to the point now in my own home I have those images, and I grew to love the Blessed Mother. And it really affected me that, gosh, I don't want to disappoint her. I'm not saying I was a perfect kid, okay? I didn't always listen, obviously. I fell away from the church for a while, but those seeds were planted as a child growing up in an Italian American home, as my mother did, and it made a difference. And so again, the Blessed Mother, as my mom would say, the Blessed Mother is watching you, I think is pretty good advice. And sometimes I think we give guilt. And again, I'm not talking about condemnation, but those little nudges from our parents, from our older siblings, that make us think twice about how we're treating people. I think sometimes that type of guilt gets a bad rap.
You write that your relationship with your mother, Rosie, was not always easy. You write this, quote, our relationship was hardly the makings of a Hallmark Mother's Day movie, but in the end, we were very close. Okay, Teresa, what was the thing that most annoyed you about your mother?
Well, I don't know if it was so much that it annoyed me. I would say that we had a difference of opinion on a lot of issues. It's starting politics. It's interesting. She was much more left leaning than I was. And so that always caused a little bit of, even though she was very faithful, she had some very, I think, different ideas about things than I did in terms of our politics. But I think she had a hard time, I think, relating to me because I was extremely independent. And I have two older sisters, and they were very close to her, and they wouldn't make a decision on, what Kleenex to buy or what paper towel to buy without asking my mother's opinion. And I basically did things on my own. Now, I obviously was more of a daddy's girl as well. I was extremely close to my father, close to my mother, but even so, and I say this in the book, I was a daddy's girl. And my father really believed, he had three daughters and he wanted to raise us to be independent and strong. And he really encouraged me. My mom did too, but my dad did so even more when I decided to go into communications. And I pretty much made that decision and went off on my own, picked the college. And my mom always kind of felt slighted and could not really understand this whole thing about career. But as I grew into my career and was on television locally back home in Detroit, she really appreciated it. So there was a little bit of a difference in vocations, where she was a mom and my husband and I couldn't have children. We never had children. So there was a little bit of a distance there. But overall, at the end of the day, you take two 100% feisty Italian American women. You're not going to agree on everything, but we really appreciated each other and loved each other. And I took care of her at the end of her life. And I think at that point, looking at her and trying to look at life through her glasses, or as we say, rosy colored glasses, it really made me appreciate her that much more.
Teresa, before I let you go, what trait of Rosie do you now see in yourself?
Oh, that's great. I think my very practical nature of, you got to be kidding me. Snap out of it. Like, the Mother Angelica, the cross is not negotiable, sweetheart. I think the urgency to get back to reality and just to knock off the nonsense and treat each other with decency. I'm really feeling my mom speaking to me about love and just getting people back into relationship with each other and being, a little bit little bit feisty sometimes. You know me, we've been friends for years.
Hmm.
And that's okay
Yeah.
to be feisty and to remind people, seriously, what do you need? A house to fall on you? So I think her practical way of looking at life.
Teresa Tomeo, thank you for the time. Thank you for joining us and for the book. Everything's Coming Up Rosie, 10 Things My Feisty Italian-American Mom Taught Me About Living a Godly Life by Teresa Tomeo is available at bookstores everywhere and online and from EWTN's Religious Catalog. Thank you, Teresa, and happy travels. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Ciao. Great to talk to you again. God bless.